Have you ever seen someone get humiliated just because they didn't look the part? She had a valid business class ticket. She had every right to be there, but the staff looked at her outfit, her skin, her age, and decided she was a fraud. They questioned her, searched her, denied her. And just when she thought she'd missed the chance of a lifetime, her father walked in. And he wasn't just any father. He was Shaquille O'Neal. This isn't just a story about fame. It's about what happens when quiet strength meets public injustice. If you believe that no one should be judged by how they look, leave a like to help this message reach more people. And if you're new here, subscribe to join a community that values dignity, respect, and justice. Where are you watching this video from? We love hearing from you, and always read every message. Mearah O'Neal clutched her duffel bag with both hands, her business-class boarding pass neatly tucked inside the front pocket of her hoodie. The early morning air at Los Angeles International Airport buzzed with movement, but inside her, there was only stillness, a quiet excitement blooming with each step. This wasn't just any trip. It was her shot at making a name for herself, separate from her father's towering legacy. She had trained, saved, and sacrificed for months to earn her place at the prestigious summer basketball camp in New York. She had flown before, but this trip felt different. For the first time, she was traveling alone, without her family or bodyguards, determined to be seen as just Mearah, not the daughter of a global icon. She wore sneakers with worn soles, her favorite Lakers hoodie, and hair pulled back into a simple bun. There was no glamour, no designer bag, just a girl with a dream, and the confidence that came from knowing she earned this moment. As she wheeled her small suitcase through Terminal B, other passengers strolled past in pressed suits, designer sunglasses, and glances that occasionally lingered on her. She didn't pay much attention. She was used to eyes following her, sometimes with curiosity, sometimes with judgment. But today, she thought, was about basketball, not appearances. Her only goal was to board that plane, get to camp and prove she could shine without her last name doing the talking. She stopped briefly near a coffee stand to check the boarding gate on her phone. Her fingers trembled slightly, but not from nerves, from excitement. She scrolled through a message from the camp welcoming her again, and her eyes lit up. This was real. She was really going. She texted her mom a quick, "Boarding soon, love you," and kept walking. Nothing could ruin this day. At least that's what she thought. Near the check-in counter, she handed her digital pass to the attendant, who glanced at it and then at her. His brow furrowed ever so slightly, a flicker of something she couldn't quite name crossing his face. She smiled politely. He didn't smile back. He handed it back without a word. No big deal, she thought. People are tired, maybe under pressure. She brushed it off. But as she walked toward security, a strange tension crept into her chest, like a shift in the air that only she could feel. The kind that whispers, not danger, but resistance. Something told her this journey wouldn't go as smoothly as she hoped, and not because of flight delays or weather, but because of something far more personal, something she couldn't control. From the moment Mearah approached the security checkpoint, the atmosphere around her seemed to change. It wasn't loud or obvious, no one shouted or pointed fingers, but the glances lingered a bit too long. The nods of acknowledgement other passengers received turned into silent assessments in her case. A uniformed TSA agent exchanged a look with a nearby colleague as Mearah handed over her documents. Neither said anything. They didn't need to. Their eyes said it all. She doesn't look like she belongs here. She noticed it, of course. How could she not? Her hoodie, her sneakers, her youth, all suddenly felt like liabilities instead of armor. She glanced at the older woman behind her, dressed in an expensive pantsuit, who was waved through without hesitation. Mearah smiled faintly to herself, tightening her grip on her phone. She had her ticket. Her ID was valid, her record was clean. Still, something about the air around her said, "Prove it anyway." Two TSA agents stepped to the side, one subtly pointing in her direction. They weren't loud. They weren't rude. But their silence carried judgment, wrapped in procedure. As Mearah approached, one of them stepped forward and asked her to stand aside for random screening. No explanation, no apology. Just a practiced tone and a quick motion of the hand, as if she were expected to obey without question. She looked around. A businessman passed through with a laptop still in his bag. A young couple giggled as they walked barefoot across the mat, barely glanced at by security. And yet here she was, being ushered into a side lane like she had something to hide. She raised her eyebrows slightly, not in defiance but in confusion. Was it because I'm young, because I'm black, because I don't look rich enough for business class? She didn't ask those questions out loud. She just moved where she was told. The agents opened her bag. They unzipped compartments, rummaged through her toiletries, held up her basketball shoes like they were evidence. No contraband was found, of course. There was nothing to find. Still, they lingered longer than necessary, inspecting her protein bars, checking a folder with her camp itinerary. One of them even asked, "Where exactly are you going again?" as if the answer would make the ticket more believable. When they finally let her go, she walked away slowly, not because she was tired, but because something inside her had shifted. Her shoulders, once high with pride, slouched just a bit. She didn't say anything to the agents. What could she say? Her silence wasn't surrender. It was the beginning of a burn. Slow, quiet, and deep. The TSA checkpoint, a place where most people felt momentary discomfort, became a spotlight of suspicion for Mearah. As she placed her bag on the conveyor belt and removed her shoes, another agent stepped forward, this one more assertive, with a clipboard in hand and a look that didn't hide his skepticism. "Step over here, miss," he said, gesturing toward a glass-walled inspection area. His voice was neutral, but his eyes betrayed judgment. Mearah glanced around again, hoping someone would notice how out of proportion this all felt. Other passengers continued flowing through, barely interrupted. No one else her age, no one else dressed like her was being pulled aside. The difference was too stark to ignore. As she stepped into the inspection zone, she could feel her cheeks warming, not from guilt but from humiliation. They patted her down. They opened her phone case. They swabbed her palms, her laptop, even the soles of her sneakers. She remained calm, answering their questions with short, polite responses, but her heart beat faster with each minute. Why am I being treated like a threat? She wondered. Why does chasing a dream have to come with interrogation? The agent asked again where she was headed. She repeated, "Basketball camp in New York," her voice steady but tight. The inspection dragged on for nearly 20 minutes. At one point, another agent asked her to confirm how she had obtained a business-class ticket. She blinked, confused. "My mom booked it," she said simply. It wasn't a lie, but the question itself carried weight, as if a girl like her flying business class didn't add up, as if there had to be some hustle, some scheme behind it. When they finally waved her through, no apology followed, no smile, just a cold, "You're clear." She gathered her things slowly, placing each item back into her bag with deliberate care, not because she was in a hurry, but because she needed to breathe. Every movement felt heavy now, not because of the bag's weight, but because of the invisible burden of being treated like she was suspicious just for existing. She looked down at her boarding pass again, still intact, still valid. But something inside her no longer felt whole. She had crossed the first obstacle, but it didn't feel like a checkpoint. It felt like a warning, one that said, "You'll have to earn every inch today, even the ones you already paid for." Mearah walked with quiet steps toward her gate, her sneakers making barely a sound on the polished floors. But inside, everything screamed. Her mind raced with fragments of the last 20 minutes, the glances, the questions, the disbelief. She wasn't angry. Not yet. What she felt was harder to name, a kind of bruised dignity that stung deeper than rage. She told herself to stay focused, to stay calm. She had a flight to catch and a goal to pursue. She sat down near the boarding area, clutching her phone like a lifeline. Around her, passengers scrolled through social media, sipped overpriced coffee or chatted about weekend plans. She was invisible again, except to the one or two staff members who occasionally glanced her way, whispering under their breath. Their expressions were unreadable, but the timing of their stares was always the same, right after looking at her ticket or hearing her name called. Our nearby overhead speaker announced pre-boarding for business class. Mearah stood up slowly, adjusting her hoodie. As she stepped into line, she felt a wave of discomfort, not from the shoes or the travel fatigue, but from the certainty that she would be questioned again. A voice in her mind whispered, "They're going to make this hard." And it was right. She approached the desk with a calm, practiced smile and handed over her boarding pass. The attendant scanned it, then hesitated. "One moment," he muttered, before turning and walking away. No explanation, just silence. People behind her shifted, annoyed by the delay, and she stepped aside, heart beginning to race. Her boarding pass was still in the attendant's hand, like he didn't trust her to hold it. She watched him speak to someone in a navy blazer, a supervisor named Charles, who walked over with a clipboard and a look of quiet authority. He didn't greet her. He didn't smile. He looked at the pass, then at her, then back at the pass. "This ticket was booked under the name Mearah O'Neal?" he asked, as if she didn't know her own name. "Yes," she answered plainly. He raised an eyebrow, still not fully convinced. "We're going to need to verify payment on this ticket," he said, his tone clipped and formal. She blinked. "Excuse me?" she asked. "Is something wrong with the reservation?" Charles didn't answer. He turned to the attendant and said, "Put her aside for now." Just like that, she was no longer a passenger. She was a problem. And with every second that passed, the line of boarding travelers grew, each one now glancing at her, the girl who apparently didn't belong in their section. Charles didn't yell. He didn't accuse her outright, but everything about his tone dripped with suspicion. "We've had cases of fraud lately," he said flatly, flipping through pages on his clipboard like he was hunting for proof that didn't exist. Sometimes people managed to fake business-class bookings using reward points or someone else's name. He looked up. "You understand why we need to be careful." Mearah held her ground, voice steady. "I have my ID, my confirmation email, and the app shows my seat assignment. I can show you all of it right now." She wasn't defensive, just clear. But clarity didn't seem to matter. Charles barely glanced at the screen she offered. "We'll still need to verify the transaction on our end," he said, turning his attention back to his clipboard. "Just protocol." Passengers around her began to stare, some whispering, others pulling their children a little closer. No one said anything aloud, but the message was loud anyway. If she's being questioned, there must be a reason. That was the worst part, not the delay, not the scrutiny, but the quiet way that strangers joined in the judgment, without knowing a thing about her. One man leaned toward his wife and said something under his breath, making her glance sideways at Mearah with mild alarm. A child stared openly. Even the staff now avoided eye contact with her. Her voice, her evidence, her presence, none of it seemed enough to break through the unspoken assumption that she didn't belong here, or worse, had tried to cheat her way in. Charles stepped aside to make a phone call. As he did, another agent came by and said, "Ma'am, please wait by the side." It was the second time she'd been asked to move aside that morning, a physical relocation to match the social one already happening around her. She nodded and stepped back, but this time her eyes burned slightly. She blinked fast, refusing to let tears fall in public. She stood there, ticketless, voiceless, and watched others board the flight she had waited months for. Each beep of the scanner felt like a countdown, not to take off, but to a deeper kind of pain. And still, no one said the word aloud, but she heard it anyway. "You don't belong here. Prove us wrong. Prove us." Mearah stood beside the check-in counter, her body stiff, her voice caught somewhere between confusion and quiet outrage. "I have my ID," she repeated, holding it out. "Here's the booking confirmation, too. It's all here." Charles didn't even glance at the documents. He kept flipping through his clipboard, as if the truth was buried somewhere on a different sheet of paper. The people behind her kept boarding. One by one, they passed without question, while she remained frozen in a moment that felt like a slow unraveling. She tried again, this time a little firmer. "I'm flying to New York for a basketball camp. My mom booked the ticket, business class." Her voice didn't crack, not yet, but her hands were starting to tremble. Charles gave a clipped response. "Until we verify the method of payment, you won't be boarding." No explanation for why that verification was needed, No suggestion of how long it might take, just a wall of indifference wrapped in protocol. The humiliation wasn't loud, it wasn't theatrical. It was cold and quiet, like a door slowly closing in her face. Other passengers glanced her way, unsure if they should feel bad or look away. Most chose the latter. One woman gave her a sympathetic half smile but said nothing. The airport suddenly didn't feel like a place of travel anymore. It felt like a test. And Mearah was failing it simply by existing. She took a small step back from the counter, gripping her phone tightly. Her suitcase sat by her side, still packed for a journey she was being denied. The gate agent avoided her eyes. Charles was already dealing with someone else, as if she no longer mattered. Her name, her documents, her presence, all treated like inconveniences rather than facts. Every second she stood there made the situation worse. Her cheeks burned with shame, not because she had done something wrong, but because everyone now assumed she had. She wasn't loud, she didn't protest, she didn't scream or cause a scene. She stood there, a teenage girl with the wrong skin tone, the wrong outfit, and apparently the wrong kind of confidence to board that plane. She turned slightly to the side, away from the line of curious eyes, and looked down at her phone. There was only one number to call, not because she needed someone to fix it for her, but because she had been silenced long enough. And in that silence, she knew her voice alone wouldn't be enough to shift the tide. Mearah stepped away from the gate, her phone shaking slightly in her hands as she scrolled to her father's contact. She hesitated for a moment, swallowing the lump in her throat. She didn't want to bother him. He was busy, always traveling, always handling a dozen things at once. But right now she wasn't calling Shaquille O'Neal the celebrity, she was calling Dad. And she needed him not for his fame, but for his grounding presence. She pressed the call button and brought the phone to her ear. One ring, two. "Hey, baby girl," came the deep, familiar voice. It was calm, warm, and instantly grounding. She didn't speak right away. The silence on her end told him everything. "What's wrong?" he asked, voice tightening. That's when it spilled, not in sobs but in the fragile details of what had just happened. Her words were quiet, steady, but each one carried weight. "They said, I can't board. They won't believe the ticket is mine," she whispered. "They said they need to verify the payment even though I showed them everything. They're not even listening." There was a pause on the other end. Not long, just enough for her to know he was processing every word. Then came his reply, low and firm. "I'm on my way." She didn't ask how. She didn't ask when. That voice, calm, composed, unshaken, was enough. And in that moment, she felt something shift. Not in the situation around her, but inside, like the weight she had been carrying alone had just been halved. The call lasted less than 60 seconds, but it changed the temperature of the room around her. Still standing near the gate, she tucked her phone away and sat down quietly, eyes fixed on the floor. She could feel the buzz of movement around her, boarding announcements, wheels rolling by, chatter in the background, but it all felt far away now. She wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't angry. She was waiting. Passengers continued to board, the line shrinking with each passing minute. Charles walked by again, not even looking at her. The silence from the staff was now awkward, tense, like they knew something wasn't right, but weren't sure how to fix it. She didn't say another word. She didn't need to. Her father was coming. And whether they were ready or not, everything was about to change. The sliding glass doors at the front of the terminal opened with a quiet whoosh, but the energy in the room shifted like thunder. Standing at 7 feet tall, dressed in a charcoal grey tracksuit and moving with effortless confidence, Shaquille O'Neal entered LAX, not like a man in a hurry, but like a storm that didn't need noise to be noticed. Conversations paused, heads turned, phones were slowly lowered. He wasn't just a celebrity walking into an airport, he was a father on a mission. He didn't yell, he didn't demand. He walked with intention, his eyes scanning until they landed on Mearah, sitting alone, silent and smaller than he remembered her looking. His pace quickened for just a second. When she saw him, her back straightened, and something unspoken passed between them, a quiet reassurance that she wasn't alone anymore, that she had been seen. As Shaq approached the gate, Staff scrambled to attention. The same agent who had dismissed Mearah suddenly stiffened, trying to compose himself. Charles, the supervisor, appeared from behind the desk like he had just remembered how to smile. "Mr. O'Neal," he said too loudly, hand already half raised in apology. But Shaq didn't shake his hand. He looked past him to his daughter. He kneeled beside her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice just yet. "They said I couldn't board," she murmured. "Said my ticket looked fake." Shaq looked up, his eyes locking onto Charles with a calm that was more powerful than anger. "She has a valid ID, a valid ticket, and a dream to chase. That should have been enough." The staff fumbled over each other to make things right. A senior airport manager was called down. Apologies rained like confetti, polite, formal, and far too late. The tone had changed entirely. The same people who had doubted her now couldn't move fast enough to fix what they had broken. Her ticket was reconfirmed, her seat reinstated. A private security officer was offered to escort her personally through boarding. But Shaq wasn't interested in theatrics. He didn't gloat. He didn't curse. He simply stood tall, his presence alone enough to expose the double standard. He didn't need to be loud to be heard. And in that moment, without saying much at all, he reminded everyone in that terminal, some men carry power, others are power. The change in energy was almost comical. Moments ago, staff were cold and dismissive. Now they couldn't move fast enough to correct themselves. Charles, the once dismissive supervisor, was red in the face, gesturing nervously as he explained the misunderstanding. The boarding agent nodded excessively, saying, "We deeply apologize," at least 3 times in under a minute. But it was too late for polite scripts. The damage wasn't procedural, it was personal. Other travelers nearby had picked up on what was happening. Some whispered to each other, nudging their companions to point at Shaq. A few pulled out phones discreetly. A little boy holding a basketball asked his dad if that was really Shaquille O'Neal. Even those who didn't know the details could feel the shift. A story was unfolding, and the ones in uniform were no longer the ones in control. A senior operations manager arrived, walking briskly in heels and clutching a tablet. She didn't even greet Shaq. She addressed Mearah first. "We're so sorry, miss. There's been a terrible mistake. You're cleared for boarding, and we'd like to offer you access to our private lounge while you wait." Her tone was overly sweet, like sugar trying to cover a bitter aftertaste. Mearah simply nodded, not out of gratitude, but because she didn't want to say what she was really thinking. Behind her, Shaq stood tall with arms crossed. He didn't speak again. His silence was sharper than any words. He had already said everything that needed saying. Every second of their backpedaling revealed how quickly respect could be manufactured when someone important walked in. But the truth was even louder. If Shaquille hadn't shown up, none of this would be happening. A younger TSA agent walked up quietly and apologized directly to Mearah. His voice was low and he seemed genuinely uncomfortable. "We messed up," he said. "I'm sorry." She looked at him for a moment, nodded and replied, "Thank you." It was the most honest exchange she'd had in the last hour, and the only one that didn't feel rehearsed. As the boarding announcement played again, this time for final call, the terminal seemed to pause for a second, not because of the flight, but because everyone now understood what had happened. A girl had been dismissed, not for anything she did, but for what she looked like. And the only thing that made the system flinch was the presence of a name too big to ignore. With her ticket now miraculously verified and her name suddenly welcomed on the manifest, Mearah was invited to board, this time with a private escort and an unnecessary smile from the same attendant who once questioned her presence. The irony wasn't lost on her. She walked forward with poise, not because they had made it easier, but because she refused to let them see how much it had cost her. A uniformed airport concierge offered to carry her bag. She declined. Not out of pride, but because every step she took now felt like part of something she needed to own. Her sneakers squeaked softly against the terminal floor as she approached the jet bridge. She didn't look back. She didn't wave. She walked forward with the quiet dignity of someone who had been bruised, but not broken. Shaq stayed behind, watching her until she was out of sight. He had said very little throughout the ordeal, but every inch of his presence had spoken volumes. He turned to the staff and gave them one last look, calm, measured, but unmistakably disappointed. "You shouldn't need a celebrity in the room to treat people with respect," he said quietly, before turning and walking away. No dramatics, just truth. Inside the cabin, Mearah took her business-class seat and stared out the window. The engine hummed gently beneath her feet, but her thoughts were far louder. She thought about how she almost didn't make it, how she was treated like a fraud in the very place she was supposed to feel accomplished. But instead of anger, what filled her chest was something stronger, resolve. She knew she didn't have her father's fame, not yet, but she had his strength. Not the kind that breaks walls, but the kind that holds its head high when the world tries to lower it. And in that moment, she promised herself something, that one day someone would recognize her in an airport, not because of her last name, but because of the name she had built for herself. As the plane rolled down the runway, she exhaled deeply and closed her eyes. The journey had finally begun. But it wasn't just about basketball anymore. It was about reclaiming something bigger, the right to be seen, heard, and respected without needing a giant to walk in behind her. When Mearah arrived at the basketball camp in upstate New York, she didn't tell anyone what had happened at the airport. Not out of shame, but because she didn't want pity. What she wanted was space to prove herself. The only place she let her emotions out was on the court. Every layup, every sprint, every rebound carried a weight that the coaches couldn't quite explain. But she knew. She was turning humiliation into hunger. The first few days were tough. Most of the girls at camp came from prep academies and private training programs. Their shoes were pristine. Their gym bags had sponsors. Mearah's gear was worn, familiar, not flashy. When someone asked if she was related to that Shaq guy, she smiled and said, "That's my dad," but left it at that. She wasn't there to ride his legacy. She was there to earn her own. And that's exactly what she did. By the end of the first week, she was the player everyone noticed, not for her name, but for her grit. She dove for loose balls, played through bruises, and volunteered for every extra drill. One coach pulled her aside and said, "You've got something rare, not just talent, fire." She didn't say thank you. She just nodded, smiled, and got back to work. Late one night, she sat alone at the edge of the court looking up at the rafters. She thought about that boarding gate, about Charles's face, about the way her hands had shaken when they accused her. And then she thought about how she had kept her voice steady, how she had called her father not to cry, but to stand, and how she had walked through that jet bridge without letting them see her break. That to her was the real victory. She didn't post about it, didn't write a caption or call out the airline. What she did instead was lace up her sneakers tighter and take the court harder. Every drop of sweat was a message to the world. You will not define me by how you treat me. I will define myself by how I rise. That was the story she was writing. Not one of victimhood, but of transformation. By the end of the camp, she wasn't just one of the best players there. She was the one others looked up to. Not for her vertical, but for her values. Her story hadn't ended at that airport, it had just begun, and now every step forward was a step they couldn't take away from her. News of the airport incident never made it to the press. There were no headlines, no viral clips, no hashtags, and that's exactly how Mearah wanted it, not erased, but reclaimed. Because sometimes the loudest stories are the ones that don't need to be broadcast. They echo in the way someone walks into a room with their head held higher, in the quiet courage to keep showing up after being told they don't belong. Still, the impact of what happened never left her. It shaped the way she saw the world and her place in it. She understood now, in a deeper way, that discrimination wasn't always obvious. It often wore a uniform, smiled politely, and used procedure as a mask. That's what hurt the most, not the shouting, but the dismissal wrapped in professionalism. The silence that said, "We don't believe you and we don't have to explain why," but that experience didn't harden her. It sharpened her. It gave her a compass. She returned from camp with more than just improved footwork or court vision. She came back with a new kind of leadership, one rooted in empathy and awareness. She started mentoring younger players, not just on their game, but on knowing their worth. She told them, "Sometimes you'll have to earn respect in rooms that were never built for you. Do it anyway." Shaquille O'Neal never mentioned the incident again. He didn't need to. He had shown up when it mattered most, and that was enough. His silence after that was a kind of respect, an acknowledgement that this was her story now. And as much as the world might have tried to reduce her to someone's daughter, she was steadily becoming someone's inspiration. What happened at that airport wasn't just a bad day, it was a fork in the road. And Mearah chose the harder path, not to fight fire with fire, but to burn brighter in her own way, to let the injustice fuel her ambition, not consume her identity. She didn't want revenge, she wanted growth, and that choice made all the difference. Some stories shout, others whisper. Hers did both. And for those who were watching closely, the message was clear. Dignity doesn't need permission. It just needs someone brave enough to carry it, even through an airport full of people who didn't see it coming. What happened to Mearah wasn't an accident. It was a reflection of how easily we judge, not by facts but by assumptions, and how often respect is reserved only for those with power, not those with purpose. But she didn't let it break her. She rose, she trained harder, she played smarter, and she proved that dignity doesn't come from a last name. It comes from how you carry yourself when no one's clapping. What would you have done in her place? Let us know in the comments. Your thoughts matter more than you think. If this story made you reflect, leave a like. It helps this message reach more people. And if you believe the world needs more stories like this, subscribe, because the next one might hit even closer to home. And if you're still thinking about what happened today, watch the next story on your screen. It's even more powerful. Trust me, you'll want to see what happens next.